The fluorescent lights of Morganvale Industries' corporate kitchen hummed with an almost menacing monotony, casting harsh shadows across the polished marble countertops that gleamed like mirrors. It was 8:30 in the evening, long after most of the staff had departed for their comfortable homes in the suburbs, leaving behind only the skeleton crew of cleaning personnel who moved through the building like ghosts. Among them was Daniel Chen, a 34-year-old single father whose hands bore the calluses of countless hours spent scrubbing, mopping, and maintaining the pristine facade of a corporation that barely acknowledged his existence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Daniel pushed his supply cart down the executive floor hallway, the wheels squeaking softly against the imported Italian tile. His navy blue maintenance uniform hung loosely on his frame, a size too large because it had been handed down from a coworker who quit 3 months prior. The company hadn't bothered ordering a replacement that fit properly. Why would they? He was just part of the invisible workforce that kept the building running while the real players conducted their high-stakes business meetings and sealed million-dollar deals. The executive kitchen was his last stop before heading home. It was where the company's leadership held their catered lunches, their champagne celebrations, their casual conversations about stock options and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Daniel had cleaned this kitchen 1,000 times, wiping down surfaces that cost more than his annual salary, emptying trash bins filled with half-eaten gourmet meals that could have fed his daughter for a week. Tonight, however, something was different. As Daniel approached the kitchen entrance, he heard voices. Laughter. The sharp clink of wine glasses. His stomach tightened. The executives were still here, which meant he would have to wait or risk interrupting their gathering. He had learned long ago that interrupting the important people was a mistake that could cost him his job. So he lingered in the hallway, his cart positioned just out of sight, hoping they would finish soon. Through the partially open door, he could see them. A dozen or so executives in their expensive suits and designer dresses, clustered around the massive kitchen island like a flock of exotic birds. At the center of the group stood Victoria Ashford, the newly appointed CEO who had taken over the company 6 months ago after her father's retirement. She was 32, Harvard-educated, and ruthlessly ambitious. Her tailored black pantsuit probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and piercing green eyes. Victoria was holding court, regaling her audience with some story that had them all laughing in that performative way people laugh when their boss tells a joke. Daniel couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the tone. Confident. Commanding. The voice of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. He checked his watch. 8:45. His daughter Emma would be waiting up for him, even though he had told her to go to bed early on school nights. She was 9 years old and far too responsible for her age, a consequence of growing up with only one parent who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Daniel's second job was weekend shifts at a warehouse across town, loading trucks from midnight to dawn while Emma stayed with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who charged him almost nothing because she understood what it meant to struggle. The laughter from the kitchen grew louder, more raucous. Someone must have opened another bottle of wine. Daniel sighed, resigning himself to a longer wait. He leaned against the wall, his mind drifting to the grocery list he needed to tackle tomorrow. Emma needed new shoes. Her current pair had holes in the soles that she tried to hide from him by walking carefully. She never complained, never asked for anything, which somehow made it worse. What kind of father couldn't even afford decent shoes for his child? The sound of breaking glass snapped him back to the present. Then Victoria's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. Well. Look what we have here. Our dedicated maintenance man, eavesdropping on executive conversations. Daniel's blood ran cold. He stepped into the doorway, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of apology. I'm sorry, Ms. Ashford. I was just waiting to clean the kitchen. I didn't mean to disturb you. Victoria's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The other executives had fallen silent, all attention now focused on the intrusion. Daniel felt their gazes like physical weights, assessing him, judging him, finding him wanting. "Disturb us?" Victoria repeated, taking a slow sip from her wine glass. "No, no. You're not disturbing us at all. In fact, your timing is perfect. We were just discussing the importance of dedication to one's craft. Of excellence in execution. Of rising above one's station through sheer determination and skill." The way she said it made Daniel's skin crawl. There was something predatory in her tone, something that suggested he had wandered into a trap without realizing it. "I'll come back later," Daniel said, starting to back away. "Nonsense." Victoria set down her glass and walked toward him with the measured steps of a cat approaching a mouse. "You're here now. And I think you might be exactly what we need to make this evening more interesting." One of the other executives, a silver-haired man named Richard whom Daniel recognized as the CFO, chuckled. "Victoria, what are you planning?" "Just a little demonstration," Victoria said, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "You see, I've been thinking about our company culture. About what separates those who lead from those who follow. About what it takes to truly earn respect in this organization." She had reached Daniel now, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something expensive and floral that probably had a French name he couldn't pronounce. "Tell me, Daniel. That is your name, isn't it? Daniel Chen?" He nodded, unsure where this was going but certain it wasn't anywhere good. "Tell me, Daniel. Do you know what I do here? What my role is in this company?" "You're the CEO, ma'am." "That's right. And do you know what that means?" "It means I'm responsible for every single person in this building. Every decision. Every success. Every failure. It's an enormous weight to carry. A burden that requires exceptional skill, intelligence, and judgment." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "Now, your job is to clean. To maintain. To keep our workspace presentable. Would you say that's an accurate description?" Daniel felt heat rising in his cheeks. "Yes, ma'am. A simple job. An honest job, certainly. But not one that requires the same level of expertise as, say, running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Would you agree?" The other executives were watching now with undisguised interest. This was entertainment for them. A diversion from their tedious evening of networking and political maneuvering. "I suppose so," Daniel managed. Victoria's smile widened. "You suppose so? How diplomatic. But here's what I'm curious about, Daniel. What separates us? You and me. We're not that different in age. We both work hard. We both show up every day and do our jobs. And yet, I'm standing here in a $5,000 suit, drinking wine that costs more per bottle than you make in a week, while you're pushing a mop bucket. What's the difference?" The question hung in the air like a knife. Daniel said nothing. What could he say? That life wasn't fair? That privilege and opportunity weren't distributed equally? That he had made choices, suffered losses, endured hardships that people like Victoria Ashford couldn't begin to comprehend? "The difference," Victoria continued, not waiting for an answer, "is excellence. It's the willingness to rise to any challenge. To prove oneself worthy of advancement. To demonstrate superiority through action rather than excuses." She turned back to her audience of executives, her voice rising with theatrical flair. "Which brings me to a proposition. A test, if you will. Daniel here claims he's just doing his job, working hard, playing his role in our corporate ecosystem. But what if I gave him a chance to prove he's capable of more? What if I offered him an opportunity to demonstrate that he possesses the same qualities that separate leaders from followers?" Richard leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Victoria walked back to the kitchen island where a large, professional-grade chef's knife lay beside a cutting board. Next to it sat an array of ingredients, vegetables, herbs, expensive cuts of meat still wrapped in butcher paper. "Our catering company was supposed to prepare a late dinner for us tonight," Victoria explained. Unfortunately, they had a scheduling conflict and had to cancel. They left the ingredients but no prepared food. Now, I was planning to order takeout, but why do that when we have perfectly good ingredients right here? She picked up the knife, testing its weight in her hand before setting it back down. Daniel, I'm going to make you an offer. A challenge, really. If you can prepare a meal for all of us using these ingredients, something truly impressive that demonstrates skill, creativity, and excellence under pressure, then I will personally write you a check for $10,000. Right here. Right now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Additionally, I'll arrange for your daughter to receive a full scholarship to Riverside Academy, one of the finest private schools in the state. Daniel's heart stopped. $10,000. A scholarship for Emma. It was more than he could have dreamed. But the way Victoria was looking at him, the smirks on the faces of the other executives, told him there was more to this offer than simple generosity. However, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a purr, if you fail, if the meal is subpar or if you can't complete it within the next hour, then you'll do something for me. You'll kiss me. Right here, in front of everyone. A proper kiss. Not a peck on the cheek. A kiss that acknowledges who has the power in this room. Who holds your fate in her hands. Who could fire you with a single word and leave you and your daughter destitute? The room erupted in shocked laughter and excited murmurs. This was better than any entertainment they could have hoped for. A public humiliation disguised as an opportunity. A trap designed to remind Daniel Chen exactly where he stood in the hierarchy. Daniel felt his hands trembling. The offer was designed to be impossible. He wasn't a chef. He had cooked basic meals for Emma, sure. Spaghetti. Grilled cheese. Chicken nuggets. But preparing a gourmet meal for a dozen executives in an hour? With ingredients he had never worked with before? It was absurd. Cruel. And yet, $10,000 would change everything. It would cover Emma's medical bills from last year when she had pneumonia and they had no insurance. It would buy her new shoes, new clothes, a birthday party with actual presents instead of homemade cards and dollar store toys. The scholarship would give her opportunities he could never provide, a future beyond the limitations of their circumstances. But the cost. The humiliation. To kiss Victoria Ashford while her colleagues laughed and recorded it on their phones. To become a story they would tell at future gatherings. Remember that janitor who thought he could cook? Remember how pathetic he looked? I can see you're thinking about it, Victoria said, her tone mockingly encouraging. That's good. That shows wisdom. Careful consideration of risk versus reward. Very executive of you. Why are you doing this? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria tilted her head, studying him like an insect under glass. Because I can. Because in this building, in this company, I make the rules. And because I think it's important for everyone to understand their place. You work for me, Daniel. Your livelihood, your daughter's welfare, it all depends on my goodwill. This is just a reminder of that reality. She picked up her wine glass again, taking a leisurely sip. So what's it going to be? Do you accept my challenge? Or do you walk away, go back to mopping floors, and wonder for the rest of your life what might have been if you had just had a little more courage? Daniel looked around the room at the assembled executives. Some were amused. Others seemed uncomfortable, though not uncomfortable enough to speak up. A few were already pulling out their phones, ready to capture whatever happened next for their social media feeds. His mind raced through the possibilities. He could refuse. Walk away. Maintain his dignity. But then Emma would continue wearing shoes with holes. She would continue attending an overcrowded public school where teachers were overworked and resources were scarce. She would continue watching him come home exhausted every night, seeing him struggle, knowing they were one emergency away from financial catastrophe. Or he could accept. Risk public humiliation for a chance at something better. Prove that he was more than just a janitor. More than Victoria Ashford's verbal punching bag. "I'll need to see the ingredients first," Daniel heard himself say. "And access to all the equipment in this kitchen." Victoria's eyebrows rose in surprise. She hadn't expected acceptance. None of them had. They had expected him to shuffle away in shame, providing them with a different kind of entertainment. His acquiescence to the humiliation. "By all means," Victoria gestured toward the kitchen island with a theatrical flourish. "Inspect your battlefield." Daniel walked forward, his legs feeling disconnected from his body. He was moving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The executives parted to let him through, their expensive cologne and perfume creating a cloud of scent that made him slightly nauseous. On the cutting board, he found what Victoria had described: fresh vegetables including tomatoes, zucchini, bell peppers, onions, and garlic. There were herbs too: basil, rosemary, thyme, and something that might have been tarragon. The butcher paper concealed what looked like chicken breasts and a nice cut of beef. In the refrigerator, he found cream, butter, eggs, and various cheeses. The kitchen itself was state-of-the-art. Professional gas range with 6 burners. Convection oven. Food processor. Stand mixer. Every knife and utensil imaginable. It was the kind of setup that would make a professional chef weep with joy. And Daniel had absolutely no idea what to do with any of it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Daniel stood in front of the kitchen island, staring at the array of ingredients as if they might suddenly arrange themselves into a coherent meal plan through sheer force of will. Behind him, he could hear the executives settling into their seats, pulling up bar stools, making themselves comfortable for the show. Someone had turned on music, something classical and pretentious that was probably meant to underscore the absurdity of a janitor attempting to cook for his betters. Victoria had moved to a position where she could observe everything, her wine glass refilled, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who had never lost a gamble in her life. She expected him to fail. They all did. This was theater, and he was the fool brought on stage to stumble through his lines before the inevitable pratfall. The clock on the wall read 8:52. 1 hour. 60 minutes to transform these raw ingredients into something that could satisfy the palates of people who regularly dined at Michelin-starred restaurants and thought nothing of spending $500 on a meal. Daniel's mind went blank. Then, through the fog of panic, a memory surfaced. Not his own, but one that belonged to someone else. Someone he had loved more than life itself. His wife, Sarah. Before she got sick. Before the medical bills and the hospital stays and the slow, agonizing decline that had torn his world apart. Sarah had loved to cook. Not professionally, but with the passion of someone who found joy in feeding the people she loved. Their tiny apartment kitchen had been her domain, and she had transformed the simplest ingredients into meals that tasted like home, like comfort, like love made tangible. Daniel could see her now in his mind's eye, moving around their cramped kitchen with the grace of a dancer, explaining what she was doing in that patient voice she reserved for teaching him things he should already know. She had tried so many times to teach him, to pass on her knowledge, but he had always been too busy with school, with tennis practice, with dreams that seemed more important than learning to dice an onion properly. After she died, he had found her recipe notebook. A worn leather journal filled with her handwriting, notes scribbled in the margins, modifications to classic dishes, experiments that had worked and ones that hadn't. He had kept it in a drawer, unable to look at it for months because the sight of her handwriting made his chest feel like it was caving in. But then Emma had started asking about her mother. What was she like? What did she love? How did she sound when she laughed? And Daniel had pulled out that notebook, reading the recipes like love letters from beyond the grave, trying to recreate the meals Sarah had made with such effortless skill. He had failed at first. Burned the food. Oversalted everything. Created dishes that were barely edible. But Emma had eaten them anyway, smiling encouragingly, telling him it was good even when it clearly wasn't. And slowly, painfully, following Sarah's notes and instructions. He had learned. Not out of passion like Sarah, but out of necessity. Out of love for his daughter. Out of a desperate need to keep some part of his wife alive in their daily lives. Daniel reached for the chicken breasts, unwrapping them with hands that had stopped trembling. He could do this. Not because he was a chef, but because Sarah had left him the tools. Her knowledge. Her recipes. Her love translated into instructions on yellow pages. The executives were talking among themselves now, placing bets on how long he would last before giving up. Victoria was describing a restaurant in Paris where she had eaten last month, making pointed comments about how sophisticated palates could immediately detect amateur cooking. Daniel tuned them out. He had spent years learning to make himself invisible, to exist in the background while important people conducted their important business. That skill served him now. In his mind, the gleaming corporate kitchen transformed into his tiny apartment with its outdated appliances and cramped counter space. The expensive ingredients became whatever he could afford from the discount grocery store. And the hostile audience faded into nothing. There was only the food. Only the memory of Sarah's voice guiding him. Only the knowledge that Emma was waiting at home, believing in him the way she always did, with the unshakable faith of a child who thought her father could do anything. He started with the basics. Mise en place. Sarah had taught him that term, laughing at his pronunciation. It meant everything in its place. Preparation before cooking. Organization preventing chaos. Daniel moved through the kitchen, gathering the tools he would need. A large pan for the chicken. A smaller one for vegetables. Mixing bowls. The chef's knife, which he tested on a tomato, finding it sharper than anything he owned. The chicken breasts were thick, uneven. He would need to butterfly them so they cooked evenly. The knife moved through the meat with surgical precision, a skill he had developed over countless dinners when money was tight and he couldn't afford to waste a single ounce of protein. He seasoned them with salt and pepper, nothing fancy, just the foundations of flavor. In the small pan, he started building a sauce. Butter melting into liquid gold. Garlic minced fine, blooming in the heat until its perfume filled the kitchen. He could hear the conversation behind him faltering as the scent registered. The tomatoes came next, diced into even pieces, their juice running red across the cutting board. Fresh basil, torn by hand the way Sarah had insisted it should be, never cut with a knife if you could help it. The chicken went into the hot pan with a satisfying sizzle. He didn't touch it, letting it develop a proper sear, that golden brown crust that meant the Maillard reaction was doing its work, transforming simple proteins into complex flavors. While it cooked, he turned his attention to the vegetables. Zucchini and bell peppers, cut into uniform pieces. Not too small, they would turn to mush. Not too large, they wouldn't cook through. Into a bowl with olive oil, more garlic, salt, pepper, and herbs. Simple. Clean. The kind of dish that relied on the quality of ingredients rather than elaborate technique. 9:15. 45 minutes gone. The chicken was done, resting on a plate while he deglazed the pan with white wine someone had left half-finished on the counter. The alcohol burned off, leaving behind depth and complexity. He added cream, watching it swirl and thicken, then the tomatoes, letting them break down into a rustic sauce. The vegetables went into the oven to roast. He would have preferred to grill them, but the kitchen didn't have a grill and he had to work with what was available. Adaptation. Sarah had been good at that too. Making do. Finding creative solutions. Turning limitations into opportunities. Someone behind him cleared their throat. Daniel ignored them, focused on plating. He had found white plates in one of the cabinets, restaurant quality, heavy and perfectly blank. A smear of sauce across each plate. The chicken, sliced on the bias to show the juicy interior. Vegetables arranged artfully but not pretentiously. A sprinkle of fresh herbs. A drizzle of good olive oil. It wasn't haute cuisine. It wasn't molecular gastronomy or avant-garde experimentation. It was honest food, prepared with care, designed to nourish rather than impress. But as Daniel set the first plate down in front of Victoria Ashford, he saw her expression shift. The smirk faltered. Her eyes widened slightly. The other executives leaned forward, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. How had the janitor produced something that actually looked like real food? That smelled this good? That made their mouths water despite their expectations? Victoria picked up her fork slowly, as if the utensil might be rigged to explode. She cut into the chicken, inspecting it with the critical eye of someone determined to find fault. The meat was perfectly cooked, tender and juicy, with just a hint of pink in the center. She took a bite. The room held its breath. Victoria chewed slowly. Her face remained impassive, giving nothing away. She took another bite. Then another. Around the table, the other executives began eating their portions, and Daniel watched their expressions change from skepticism to surprise to something approaching respect. "This is quite good," Richard admitted grudgingly, as if the words pained him. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Daniel's throat tightened. "My wife taught me. Before she passed away." The revelation hung in the air, changing the atmosphere in the room. Suddenly, he wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a widower. A single father. A man with a story. For a moment, their carefully maintained distance wavered, and they saw him as human. But only for a moment. Victoria set down her fork, her plate half finished. She had eaten enough to know that Daniel had succeeded in the challenge, but she wasn't about to admit it. Not yet. Not in a way that would cost her $10,000 and a scholarship. "It's adequate," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You clearly have some basic competency in the kitchen." But the challenge wasn't just to make edible food. It was to demonstrate excellence. To prove that you possess the same qualities that separate leaders from followers. She stood, walking around the table to where Daniel stood beside the kitchen island, his hands covered in sauce and oil, his uniform stained with the evidence of his work. "And I'm not convinced you've done that. Yes, the food is decent. But excellence? True superiority? I don't taste that here. What I taste is adequate home cooking. The kind of meal someone might make for their family. Competent. Unremarkable. Safe." Daniel felt his heart sinking. She was going to find a way to deny him the money, the scholarship, everything he had risked his dignity to pursue. The challenge had been rigged from the start. Even success would be reframed as failure because Victoria Ashford couldn't afford to let a janitor win. However, Victoria continued, and Daniel caught a glimmer of something in her eyes. Not kindness exactly, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps. Or calculation. "I am a woman of my word. The agreement was that you would prepare a meal that demonstrated skill and creativity under pressure. You've done that. The food is good. Better than I expected, certainly. So I will honor our arrangement." She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. The scratch of her pen across paper seemed impossibly loud in the quiet kitchen. When she tore out the check and handed it to Daniel, he saw his name written in her precise script. $10,000. Made out to Daniel Chen. "And I'll arrange for your daughter's scholarship application to Riverside Academy," Victoria added. "Though I make no guarantees about acceptance. That will depend on her own merits, not your cooking skills." Daniel stared at the check in his hands, unable to quite believe it was real. $10,000. More money than he had seen in years. Enough to change everything. "However," Victoria said again, and Daniel's stomach dropped. There was always a however. Always another condition. Another trap. "Our agreement also specified what would happen if you failed. And while you didn't fail in the cooking, you also didn't truly excel. You didn't demonstrate the kind of superiority I was looking for. So I believe we should split the difference." She moved closer, so close Daniel could feel the heat from her body, smell her perfume mixing with the aroma of food. "You keep the money. You get the scholarship application. But you still owe me that kiss. Because you didn't win, Daniel. Not really. You survived. You scraped by. You did the minimum necessary to avoid complete humiliation. But you didn't triumph. You didn't prove yourself superior. You just proved you're competent at following instructions, which is exactly what I would expect from someone in your position. The other executives were watching with renewed interest. This was the entertainment they had been waiting for. The janitor would take the money and the scholarship, but he would still have to pay the price. Still have to acknowledge his place in the hierarchy. Still have to kiss the CEO in front of everyone and accept that his dignity had a price tag. Daniel looked down at the check. He thought about Emma, asleep at home, dreaming about a future that might finally include new shoes and good schools and opportunities her father could never provide on his own. He thought about Sarah, who had taught him that love meant sacrifice, that sometimes you swallowed your pride to give your child a better life. And he thought about Victoria Ashford, standing inches away, expecting him to bend. Expecting him to break. Expecting him to prove that money could buy anything, even a man's self-respect. The check felt heavy in his hand. Heavier than paper should feel. Weighted with possibility and shame in equal measure. Victoria leaned in slightly, her lips curved in that predatory smile. It's just a kiss, Daniel. Surely your pride isn't worth more than your daughter's future. Surely you're practical enough to see that this is a small price to pay for what you're getting in return. Around the table, phones were out now, cameras ready to capture the moment. This would be their story. The time Victoria Ashford made a janitor kiss her for money. A tale of power and humiliation, of knowing one's place, of the immutable hierarchy that governed their world. Daniel folded the check carefully, precisely, and slipped it into his pocket. His hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped. He looked Victoria Ashford directly in the eyes, and for the first time that evening, she was the one who seemed uncertain. Ms. Ashford, Daniel said quietly, I appreciate the check. And I'm grateful for the opportunity you're providing my daughter. But I need to tell you something about that meal I just cooked. Victoria's smile flickered. What about it? My wife didn't just teach me how to cook. She taught me why we cook. It's not about impressing people or demonstrating superiority. It's about love. About taking care of the people who matter to you. About nourishment in every sense of the word. He paused, gathering his thoughts, aware that every eye in the room was on him. When Sarah was dying, she couldn't eat most foods. The medications made her nauseous. Everything tasted wrong to her. But I would cook anyway, making her favorite dishes, hoping that something would appeal to her. And sometimes, on good days, she would take a few bites and smile at me, and in those moments, food became something more than just sustenance. It became hope. It became memory. It became love. The kitchen was absolutely silent now. Even the classical music had stopped, though Daniel couldn't remember anyone turning it off. I'm not a chef, Daniel continued. I'm not trying to compete with French restaurants or demonstrate my superiority over anyone. I'm a father who learned to cook because my daughter needed to eat, and I wanted every meal to carry some echo of the mother she barely remembers. That's what you tasted tonight. Not excellence in the way you define it. But something more important. Something real. Victoria's face had gone pale. Around the table, the other executives looked uncomfortable, their phones slowly lowering as they realized this wasn't the entertainment they had expected. So I'm going to respectfully decline your kiss, Daniel said. Not because I'm too proud, but because my dignity isn't for sale. Not for $10,000. Not for a scholarship. Not for anything. You can keep the check if that's the condition. My daughter and I will manage somehow. We always do. He pulled the check from his pocket and held it out to Victoria. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her green eyes searched his face, looking for weakness, for doubt, for any sign that he might waver. But Daniel had made his choice. He had drawn his line. And he would not cross it, no matter the cost. Finally, Victoria reached out, but instead of taking the check, she pushed his hand back toward him. Keep it, she said softly. Her voice had changed, losing its sharp edge. Keep the money. And I'll send the scholarship application for your daughter tomorrow. No conditions. No kiss required. Daniel stared at her, confused. I don't understand. Victoria walked back to her seat, picked up her wine glass, and drained it in one long swallow. When she set it down, her hands were shaking slightly. You passed the test, Daniel. The real test. Not the cooking challenge, though that was impressive. But the character test. I wanted to see if you could be bought. If your dignity had a price. If you would compromise yourself for money. She looked around at her assembled executives, and there was something new in her expression. Something that might have been shame. Do you know why I did this? Why I subjected you to this humiliation? Because 6 months ago, when I took over this company, I discovered something disturbing. The executive team had been embezzling funds. Not huge amounts. Small, careful thefts that added up over years. And every single person in this room was complicit. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. I couldn't fire them all, Victoria continued. It would have destroyed the company's stability. So I've been testing them instead. Watching them. Seeing who could be trusted and who couldn't. And I've learned that almost everyone has a price. Almost everyone will compromise their principles if the reward is high enough. She turned back to Daniel. But not you. You were willing to walk away from money that could change your life rather than sacrifice your self-respect. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable? Daniel didn't know what to say. The entire evening had taken on a surreal quality, as if he had stumbled into someone else's story. I'm offering you a job, Victoria said. Not in maintenance. In management. I need people I can trust. People with integrity. People who won't sell out their principles for a paycheck. Starting salary is $80,000 a year, plus benefits, including health insurance that will cover your daughter completely. The room spun. Daniel reached for the counter to steady himself. $80,000 a year. Health insurance. A real job with a real future. I don't have a business degree, he managed. I don't have any management experience. You have something more important, Victoria said. You have character. The rest can be learned. What do you say? Daniel thought about Emma. About the life he could give her now. About possibilities that had seemed impossible just an hour ago. But he also thought about the other maintenance workers, his colleagues who scraped by on minimum wage, who were invisible to people like Victoria Ashford. I'll take the job, he said slowly. On one condition. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating? You give fair raises to everyone on the maintenance staff. Not huge amounts. But enough that they're paid a living wage. Enough that they don't have to work 2 jobs to survive. Enough that they can afford decent shoes for their kids. Around the table, the executives looked scandalized. One didn't make demands of Victoria Ashford. One didn't attach conditions to her generous offers. But Victoria smiled. A real smile this time, not the predatory smirk from earlier. Deal, she said, extending her hand. Welcome to the executive team, Daniel Chen. As Daniel shook her hand, he caught sight of the clock. 10:37. He was going to be late getting home. Emma would probably still be awake, worrying about him. But for once, he would have good news to share. For once, the struggle would ease just a little. And for once, he could tell his daughter that sometimes, just sometimes, refusing to compromise yourself led to something better than any reward money could buy. The morning after the kitchen incident, Daniel woke up in his apartment still wearing his work clothes from the night before. He had collapsed onto his bed at nearly midnight, too exhausted to change, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. For a moment, lying there in the gray dawn light filtering through the thin curtains, he wondered if it had all been a dream. The challenge. The cooking. Victoria's unexpected job offer. It seemed too surreal, too impossibly fortunate to be real. Then he felt the folded check in his pocket, and he knew it had happened. Emma was already awake, sitting at their tiny kitchen table working on homework she must have started before he got home. She looked up when she heard him stirring, her face brightening with that smile that always made his chest ache with love. "You're home late," she said, not accusingly but with the simple observation of a child who had learned to track her father's unpredictable schedule. "Mrs. Patterson said you had something important at work." Daniel sat down across from her, suddenly unsure how to explain what had transpired. How did you tell a 9-year-old that her father had been publicly humiliated, challenged to cook for executives who saw him as entertainment, and then offered a job that could change their entire lives? "Something did happen," he said carefully. "Something good, I think. How would you feel about me getting a different job? Still at the same company, but doing different work?" Emma's brow furrowed in that serious way she had, so much older than her years. "Would you still have to work nights?" "No. Normal hours. And better pay. A lot better." Her eyes widened. "Does that mean I can get new shoes?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. His daughter's dreams were so small. So reasonable. New shoes. That was the extent of what she allowed herself to hope for. Not toys or games or trips to amusement parks. Just shoes without holes. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "New shoes. And maybe some other things too. Would you like to go to a different school? A private school with small classes and good teachers?" Emma looked frightened by the prospect. "Would I have to leave my friends?" "Maybe. But you could make new ones." She considered this seriously, chewing her lower lip the way she did when thinking hard about something. "Would it make you happy if I went to a fancy school?" Daniel reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "I want you to have opportunities, Em. I want you to have choices. But you don't have to decide right now. We'll figure it out together, okay?" She nodded, then went back to her homework, the conversation apparently settled in her mind. Daniel envied that ability to simply accept and move forward. Children were resilient in ways adults had forgotten how to be. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Daniel answered cautiously. "Mr. Chen? This is Patricia Reeves from Morganvale Industries Human Resources. Ms. Ashford asked me to call you regarding your new position. Can you come in today at 10 for paperwork and orientation?" Daniel glanced at the clock. 7:15. "Yes, I can do that." "Excellent. Please come to the executive floor. Ms. Ashford would like to meet with you personally before we begin the formal process." After Patricia hung up, Daniel sat staring at his phone. It was really happening. The job was real. The change was real. Everything was about to shift in ways he couldn't fully comprehend yet. He showered, standing under the weak spray from their temperamental water heater, trying to wash away the exhaustion and uncertainty. His only decent clothes were the ones he wore to parent-teacher conferences, khaki pants with a frayed hem and a button-down shirt that had seen better days. They would have to do. He wasn't executive material, not in appearance or experience. But Victoria had said character mattered more than credentials. He hoped she meant it. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch Emma until school started. The elderly woman had been their guardian angel for years, asking little in return for the countless hours she spent making sure Emma was never alone. Daniel promised himself that once his first real paycheck came through, he would find a way to properly thank her. Maybe pay for those home repairs she always mentioned but never had money to address. The bus ride to Morganvale Industries felt different this time. Daniel had taken this route hundreds of times, but always in his maintenance uniform, invisible among the other working-class people heading to jobs that kept the city running. Now he was wearing his sad khakis and threadbare shirt, trying to look like someone who belonged in a corporate office. The other passengers didn't notice the difference, but Daniel felt it acutely. The building loomed against the morning sky, all glass and steel and aspirational architecture designed to inspire awe. Daniel had cleaned every floor of the structure, knew its service corridors and utility closets intimately. but he had never entered through the main lobby during business hours. That space was for the real employees, the ones with badges and briefcases and purposeful strides. Security stopped him at the entrance. Of course they did. He looked exactly like what he was, someone who didn't belong. "I have a meeting with Ms. Ashford," Daniel explained, feeling heat creep up his neck. "In human resources." The guard, a man named Marcus who Daniel knew from late-night shifts, looked surprised. "Daniel? What are you doing coming through the front?" "Long story. Can you call up and verify?" Marcus made the call, his expression growing more astonished as whoever answered confirmed Daniel's appointment. "Go on up. They're expecting you." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt eternal. Daniel watched the numbers climb, each floor representing a level of the corporate hierarchy he had never been permitted to access. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world of polished surfaces and muted colors, where even the air felt expensive. Patricia Reeves was waiting at reception. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the efficient manner of someone who had processed thousands of new hires and knew exactly how these conversations should flow. "Mr. Chen, welcome. If you'll follow me, Ms. Ashford is ready to see you." Victoria's office was exactly what Daniel expected, enormous, tastefully decorated, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She sat behind a desk that probably cost more than his car, reviewing something on her computer. When Patricia showed him in, Victoria looked up and gestured for him to sit. "Thank you, Patricia. Please give us 15 minutes before we start the formal process." Once they were alone, Victoria studied Daniel with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. He forced himself not to fidget, to meet her gaze with something approaching confidence even though his stomach was churning. "I'm going to be honest with you," Victoria said finally. "Several of my executives are unhappy about my decision to hire you. They think I'm making a mistake. That I'm letting sentiment override sound business judgment." Daniel's heart sank. Here it came. The revelation that she had reconsidered. That the job offer had been impulsive, something she regretted in the cold light of day. "I don't care what they think," Victoria continued. "But I do care whether you're going to be able to handle this. Management is not easy, Daniel. You'll be making decisions that affect people's livelihoods. You'll be dealing with office politics and corporate maneuvering and pressure from above and below. You'll be challenged by people who think you don't deserve to be there. And they won't be subtle about it." "I understand," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure he really did. "Do you? Because walking away from a kiss is one thing. Navigating corporate warfare is something else entirely. You have integrity, and that's valuable. But integrity alone won't be enough. You'll need to develop skills, learn systems, understand how this organization actually functions beneath all the mission statements and corporate rhetoric." Victoria stood and walked to the window, her back to him. "I'm taking a risk on you. Not because I'm sentimental, but because I believe people with strong character can learn business skills faster than people with business skills can develop character. But you have to be willing to do the work. To study. To adapt. To accept that you're going to make mistakes and learn from them." "I am," Daniel said. "Willing, I mean. To do whatever it takes." "Good. Because I'm assigning you to work directly under Richard Thornton for the first 6 months. He's our CFO, and he's one of the people who thinks hiring you is a mistake. He's going to test you. Push you. Try to make you fail so he can prove he was right to doubt you." Daniel swallowed hard. Richard. The silver-haired man from last night who had watched the whole spectacle with barely concealed amusement. "Why put me under someone who wants me to fail? Because if you can handle Richard, you can handle anything. And because despite his personal feelings, he's an excellent teacher. If you survive his training, you'll understand this company better than executives who have been here for years." Victoria turned back to face him. "Your official title will be Management Associate. You'll be learning all aspects of our operations, finance, human resources, supply chain, marketing, strategic planning. It's essentially an executive training program compressed into 6 months. After that, if you've proven yourself, we'll discuss a permanent position with actual authority. And if I don't prove myself? Then you'll go back to maintenance, and we'll both acknowledge this experiment failed. But I don't think that's going to happen. I saw something in you last night, Daniel. Not just integrity, but strength. The kind of strength that comes from surviving real hardship. From being broken and putting yourself back together. That's worth more than any MBA. Patricia returned with folders and forms, and the next 2 hours passed in a blur of paperwork. Direct deposit information. Benefits enrollment. Non-disclosure agreements. Employee handbook acknowledgement. Daniel signed everything in a daze, his hand cramping from writing his name so many times. The health insurance forms made him pause. The coverage was comprehensive, including dental and vision. No deductibles. No coverage limits. He thought about Emma's pneumonia last year, the medical bills that still arrived sporadically, the collections calls he avoided because he had no money to offer. This insurance would have made all the difference. Your coverage begins immediately, Patricia explained. And your daughter is automatically included as a dependent. If you have any outstanding medical bills, submit them to claims. Most should be covered retroactively within the first 30 days of employment. Daniel had to look away, blinking hard against the sudden burning in his eyes. 6 years of barely holding on. 6 years of choosing between medicine and groceries, between doctor visits and rent. And now, with the stroke of a pen, that particular terror was gone. His starting salary was actually $90,000, not the $80,000 Victoria had mentioned. Patricia explained that the additional $10,000 was a signing bonus being distributed across the year to help him transition financially. It was more money than Daniel had imagined earning in his entire life, let alone in a single year. Ms. Ashford also wanted me to give you this, Patricia said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a corporate credit card in his name. For work expenses. Clothes appropriate for the office environment, laptop, phone, books or courses you need for professional development. Stay reasonable, but don't hesitate to purchase what you need to succeed. By the time Patricia finished processing him into the system, it was nearly 1 p.m. Richard Thornton's assistant called to schedule their first meeting for the next morning at 8. Daniel left the building in a fog, his new employee badge clipped to his shirt, a folder full of information under his arm. He took the bus to Emma's school, arriving just as dismissal began. She came out with her class, surprised to see him there. Usually, she walked to Mrs. Patterson's house after school. "Why are you here?" she asked, not upset but curious. "I thought we could go shopping," Daniel said. "For those shoes you need." Emma's face lit up in a way that made Daniel's throat tight. Such a small thing. Shoes. But to her, it represented something larger. Proof that things were changing. That the endless struggle might actually ease. They took another bus to the mall, a place Daniel usually avoided because walking through stores full of things he couldn't afford was its own special form of torture. But today, with the corporate credit card burning in his wallet and the promise of actual paychecks in his future, the mall felt different. Still overwhelming, but no longer forbidden. In the shoe store, Emma was hesitant to pick anything expensive. She gravitated toward the clearance rack, the damaged boxes, the styles that were being discontinued. Daniel had to gently guide her to the regular displays, assuring her that they could afford proper shoes now. "Really?" she kept asking. "Are you sure?" "These are so expensive, Dad." "I'm sure, sweetheart. Pick whatever you like." She chose a simple pair of sneakers, nothing flashy, but new and whole and in her correct size. When the salesperson brought them out and Emma tried them on, she walked around the store with exaggerated care, as if the shoes might disappear if she wasn't careful. "How do they feel?" Daniel asked. "Good," Emma said softly. "Really good." They bought the shoes, along with 2 other pairs because the salesperson explained that children should rotate footwear for proper foot development. Daniel tried not to think about all the years Emma had worn the same shoes until they literally fell apart. tried not to calculate the damage he might have unknowingly done to her growing feet because he couldn't afford the luxury of rotation. "Can we get ice cream?" Emma asked as they left the store, emboldened by the shopping bags and her father's unusual mood. "We can get ice cream," Daniel agreed. They sat in the food court, Emma with a chocolate cone that was far too large for her to finish, Daniel with coffee that was mediocre but served its purpose. Around them, the mall buzzed with afternoon activity. Teenagers cutting class. Elderly people walking for exercise. Parents with strollers navigating the crowds. "Dad?" Emma said, chocolate smeared on her chin. "Are we rich now?" Daniel laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "No, honey. We're not rich. But things are going to be easier. We'll have enough." "That's different from rich, but it's enough." "Is it because you cooked that food?" So she had noticed his kitchen-stained uniform last night. Of course she had. Emma noticed everything. "Sort of. I did something at work that showed my boss I could handle more responsibility. So she gave me a new job with better pay." "Will you still have to work so hard?" The question revealed more than Emma probably intended. She had seen him exhausted, defeated, ground down by the relentless demands of double shifts and financial desperation. She had seen him fall asleep at the dinner table, wake up before dawn, drag himself through days that blurred together into an endless gray struggle. "I'll still work hard," Daniel said. "But it will be different. I'll be home more. We'll have more time together. And you won't have to worry about things like whether we can afford shoes." Emma nodded seriously, processing this information with that thoughtful expression that made her seem far older than 9 years old. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said suddenly. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of him? When was the last time he had allowed himself to feel anything other than the grinding determination to survive one more day? "I'm proud of you too, Em. You've been so strong. So patient with me while I figured things out. I know it hasn't been easy." "It's okay," she said simply. "We're a team." They were. The smallest team in the world. 2 people against everything life could throw at them. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like they might actually win. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his new laptop, the one Patricia had told him to purchase. The cheapest model had still been $600, an amount that would have been unthinkable yesterday. He had stood in the electronics store for 20 minutes, paralyzed by the cost, until a salesperson pointed out that the slightly more expensive model had better specifications for the same warranty period. Now Daniel stared at the glowing screen, trying to figure out where to start. Victoria had given him a reading list, books on corporate finance, organizational behavior, strategic management. The titles alone were intimidating. He had gone to college briefly before Sarah got sick, but that was over a decade ago, and he had been studying kinesiology with dreams of becoming a physical therapist. Business was an entirely different language. He started with the first book, a tome on financial analysis that might as well have been written in code. Balance sheets. Income statements. Cash flow analysis. Return on investment calculations. The concepts swam before his eyes, familiar words arranged in unfamiliar patterns that refused to cohere into meaning. By midnight, Daniel had read the same chapter 3 times and retained almost nothing. Panic began to set in. What had he been thinking? That he could just step into an executive role and figure it out? That integrity and work ethic could substitute for years of education and experience? He was going to fail. Richard Thornton would tear him apart. The other executives would watch with satisfaction as the janitor proved he didn't belong in their world. Victoria would realize she had made a mistake. And Daniel would go back to maintenance, except now it would be worse because everyone would know he had tried and failed to rise above his station. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Still awake? It's Victoria. Patricia gave me your new number. I'm guessing you're panicking about tomorrow." Daniel stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was this a test? An opportunity to prove he was confident? Or just his new boss checking in? He typed carefully. Reading the financial analysis book. It's challenging. The response came quickly. It's brutal. I hated that book. Try this instead. A link to a video lecture series followed. Start with the basics. You don't need to master everything overnight. You just need to understand enough to ask intelligent questions. That's the real skill, knowing what you don't know and being willing to learn. Thank you, Daniel typed. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be hard enough without exhaustion clouding your judgment. Richard will try to overwhelm you. Let him. Take notes. Ask for clarification. Show him you're not afraid to admit ignorance. Counterintuitively, that's how you earn respect in corporate environments. Daniel wanted to ask more questions, but Victoria had already gone offline. He clicked the link she sent and found himself watching a professor explain financial concepts using analogies and real-world examples. The information started making sense. Not all of it, but enough to feel less panicked. He finally went to bed at 2 in the morning, setting 3 alarms because missing his first real day would be catastrophic. The next morning arrived too quickly. Daniel dressed in his khakis and buttoned down again, painfully aware that he needed to use that corporate card to buy actual business attire. But there was no time this morning. He would have to survive looking shabby for one more day. Emma was already up, eating cereal at the table. She had gotten herself ready for school, her new shoes sitting by the door where she had apparently placed them the night before to ensure they wouldn't be forgotten. You look nervous, she observed. I am nervous, Daniel admitted. First day at the new job. You'll be great, Emma said with absolute confidence. You're the best at everything. If only that were true. But Daniel appreciated the faith, even if it was based on a 9-year-old's limited understanding of the world. Richard Thornton's office was on the same floor as Victoria's, but where hers was all windows and light, his was darker, more traditional. Wood paneling. Heavy furniture. The kind of space that spoke of old money and established power. Richard sat behind his desk reviewing reports, not looking up when Daniel knocked. Come in and close the door, Richard said without preamble. Sit down. Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question. Daniel did as instructed, his stomach nodding. This was going to be worse than he thought. Richard finally looked up, his pale blue eyes assessing Daniel with the cold calculation of someone evaluating a purchase they suspected might be defective. I opposed your hiring, Richard said flatly. I told Victoria it was a mistake. That she was letting emotion override judgment. That bringing in someone with no relevant experience or education would disrupt carefully maintained systems and waste resources on an experiment doomed to fail. He paused, letting the words land. However, Victoria is the CEO. Her decision is final. Which means my job is now to either prove I was right about you being a mistake, or to be proven wrong. I prefer being right. But I'm also capable of admitting when I misjudge someone. The question is, which scenario will you prove true? I intend to prove you wrong, sir, Daniel said quietly. Intentions are meaningless. Results matter. Do you know why Victoria is a good CEO, Daniel? It's not because she's smart, though she is. It's not because she's ambitious, though she certainly is that too. It's because she understands that this company is a machine. Every person is a component. Every process is a gear. And machines only work when every part functions according to its design. Richard leaned back in his chair. You're a new part being installed in a machine that was running fine without you. That means you need to either improve the machine's efficiency or you're just added weight that slows everything down. There's no neutral option. You either add value or you subtract it. I understand, Daniel said. No, you don't. But you will. Here's how the next 6 months work. You shadow me. Everywhere I go, every meeting I attend, every decision I make, you observe. You take notes. You ask questions during designated times, not whenever curiosity strikes. You read everything I assign. You complete every task I give you, no matter how menial or pointless it seems. And you never, ever embarrass me in front of other executives by revealing your ignorance in public forums. Richard pulled out a thick binder and slid it across the desk. This is your curriculum. Required reading, case studies, financial models to analyze. You'll be tested weekly on the material. Fail 3 tests and you're done, regardless of Victoria's faith in you. Because I won't waste my time teaching someone who can't or won't learn. Daniel opened the binder. The reading list inside was extensive. Books. Articles. Industry reports. More material than he could possibly absorb in 6 months, let alone while also working full-time. This seems like a lot, Daniel ventured. It's the minimum. Most executives have spent years studying this material in graduate programs. You're getting the compressed version. If you're as capable as Victoria believes, you'll manage. If not, we'll discover that quickly enough. Richard stood, indicating the meeting was over. We have a budget review meeting in 20 minutes. Conference room B, bring your laptop and don't speak unless directly addressed. Observe how decisions are made. Pay attention to what's said and what's left unsaid. Corporate communication is as much about subtext as text. Daniel left the office feeling like he had been through a battle. And that had just been the introduction. The actual work hadn't even started yet. The budget review meeting was exactly as intimidating as Daniel feared. Department heads presented financial requests for the next quarter while Richard dissected their proposals with surgical precision. Every assumption was challenged. Every projection questioned. Every expense justified or eliminated. Daniel sat in the corner taking notes, trying to follow conversations that referenced concepts he barely understood. EBITDA. Amortization. Depreciation schedules. Capital expenditures versus operational expenses. The executives spoke in a language he didn't know, and their comfort with that language only emphasized how far he had to go. At one point, the head of marketing presented a proposal for a new advertising campaign. Richard tore it apart, pointing out flawed assumptions about customer acquisition costs and lifetime value calculations. The marketing director defended her position, citing industry benchmarks and competitive analysis. The argument grew heated. Daniel watched, fascinated despite his confusion. This was warfare conducted with spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides. Territory won and lost over percentage points and statistical significance. No one raised their voice, but the aggression was palpable. Richard ultimately approved a modified version of the campaign with a reduced budget and stricter performance metrics. The marketing director left looking like she had lost a fight, even though she had gotten most of what she wanted. After the meeting, Richard turned to Daniel. "What did you observe?" Daniel hesitated. The marketing director's initial proposal was too aggressive. Why? Because the projected returns didn't account for market saturation and customer churn? Partially correct. The real issue was that her success metrics were designed to make the campaign look successful regardless of actual business impact. She wanted to measure impressions and engagement rather than revenue and profit. Classic marketing mistake, confusing activity with results. Richard started walking, Daniel hurrying to keep pace. Every department wants more resources. Every executive believes their projects are critical. My job is to separate genuine needs from empire building. To allocate limited capital to initiatives that actually generate returns. Do you understand why that matters? Because resources are finite? Because everything is finite. Money. Time. Attention. Talent. And in business, finite resources must be deployed strategically or they're wasted. That's what separates successful companies from failures. Not the quality of their products or the brilliance of their leadership, but the efficiency of their resource allocation. They entered another conference room where a presentation was already in progress. Richard took a seat, and Daniel sat beside him, opening his laptop to continue taking notes. The afternoon proceeded in similar fashion. Meeting after meeting. Presentations. Arguments. Decisions made through processes Daniel couldn't fully follow. By 5 o'clock, his head was pounding and his notebook was filled with observations that would take hours to decode. Richard finally dismissed him with instructions to read the first 2 chapters of the financial analysis book and prepare a summary of key concepts for discussion tomorrow morning at 7:30. 7:30. That meant leaving home at 6 to arrive on time. Which meant waking at 5 to get Emma ready for school. Which meant sleep was going to be a luxury he couldn't afford. Daniel took the bus home in a daze. Emma was at Mrs. Patterson's, having dinner that the elderly woman had prepared. Daniel thanked her profusely, promised to figure out after-school care soon, and took Emma home. While she did homework, Daniel made dinner from whatever was in their mostly empty refrigerator. Pasta with Jared sauce. Not gourmet, but filling. They ate together, Emma chattering about her day at school, Daniel half listening while his mind spun through everything he had observed. After Emma went to bed, Daniel returned to his kitchen table with the financial analysis book. The chapters Richard assigned covered ratio analysis and financial statement interpretation. Daniel read slowly, taking notes, cross-referencing terms he didn't understand with online searches. By midnight, he had completed the reading but wasn't confident about his understanding. The concepts made sense individually, but seeing how they connected into comprehensive analysis eluded him. He wrote his summary anyway, doing his best to articulate what he had learned. At 1 in the morning, he finally slept, alarm set for 5. The pattern repeated. Wake early. Get Emma ready. Rush to work. Shadow Richard through endless meetings. Take notes. Read assigned material late into the night. Sleep too little. Wake exhausted. Repeat. After a week, Daniel's body was screaming for rest. His eyes burned. His head ached constantly. He had to drink coffee in quantities that made his hands shake and his heart race. But he kept going because stopping meant failing, and failing meant going back to maintenance, and that was unacceptable. The first test arrived on Friday. Richard handed him a case study about a company considering an acquisition and gave him 2 hours to analyze whether the purchase made financial sense. Daniel stared at the numbers, trying to apply the concepts he had been absorbing. Current ratio. Debt-to-equity ratio. Return on assets. Each calculation told part of the story, but synthesis eluded him. He turned in his analysis knowing it was incomplete. Richard reviewed it without comment, made some marks with a red pen, and handed it back. 68%. Failing by any academic standard, though Richard's threshold was 65. You survived by 3 points, Richard said. Barely. Your analysis identified relevant factors but missed the critical issue. The acquisition target's pension liabilities weren't properly accounted for in the balance sheet. That oversight would have cost us $50 million in unexpected obligations. Daniel felt sick. How was he supposed to know about pension accounting? That hadn't been in the readings. It was in Chapter 7, Richard said, reading his expression. The section on off-balance sheet liabilities. You skimmed it. He had. Because he had been too tired to read carefully. Because 3 in the morning was a terrible time to absorb complex information. Because he was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. Don't make the same mistake twice, Richard said. Next test is Monday. Prepare accordingly. That weekend, Daniel barely saw Emma. He spent Saturday at the public library, reading everything Richard had assigned plus additional material he found that might fill the gaps in his understanding. Sunday was more of the same, with breaks only to feed Emma and make sure she had clean clothes for school. By Monday, his eyes felt like sandpaper and his thoughts moved through fog. But his second test score was 79%. Improvement. Not good enough by his standards, but acceptable by Richard's metrics. The pattern continued. Tests every week. Meetings every day. Reading every night. Daniel felt himself changing, his brain adapting to new ways of thinking. Financial statements started making sense. Corporate strategy became legible. The language of business, initially so foreign, began to feel almost natural. But the cost was brutal. He never saw Emma anymore, not really. They passed each other in the mornings and at dinner, but she had been in bed by the time he finished studying. Mrs. Patterson had become Emma's primary caregiver, a fact that filled Daniel with guilt even as he acknowledged its necessity. One evening, 3 weeks into the new job, Emma asked if they could watch a movie together. "Not tonight, sweetheart," Daniel said automatically. "I have a lot of reading to do." "You always have reading to do," Emma said quietly. "You never have time anymore." The words hit harder than any criticism Richard had delivered. Daniel looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the loneliness in her eyes. She had new shoes and better food and health insurance. But she had lost her father in the process. "You're right," Daniel said, closing his laptop. "Pick a movie. Any movie you want." "Really? Really? The reading can wait." They watched an animated film Emma had seen a dozen times, cuddled together on their threadbare couch. Daniel tried to focus on the screen, but his mind kept drifting to the unfinished case study waiting on his laptop. The test on Wednesday. The meeting notes he needed to review. Emma fell asleep against his shoulder halfway through the movie. Daniel carried her to bed, tucking her in with the worn teddy bear she still slept with. Looking at her peaceful face, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Was this job worth the cost? Was financial stability worth sacrificing the time they had together? But then he remembered the years of struggle. The fear. The helplessness of watching his daughter go without while he worked himself to exhaustion just to stay barely afloat. This new job was hard, brutally hard. But it offered something the old life never could, a future. Not just survival, but actual possibilities. He would find balance. Eventually. Once he got through the initial learning curve. Once Richard stopped testing him every week. Once he proved himself capable. Then he could work normal hours and be present for Emma. At least, that's what Daniel told himself as he returned to the kitchen table and opened his laptop. The case study wasn't going to complete itself, and Wednesday's test would determine whether he survived another week. The clock read 10:30. If he worked until 2, he could finish the analysis and get 3 hours of sleep before waking at 5. It would be enough. It had to be enough. Daniel began typing, his exhausted brain forcing itself to focus on depreciation schedules and capital cost analysis, while down the hall his daughter slept, dreaming of a father who was present rather than perpetually busy, even as that father worked himself into the ground trying to build the future he thought she deserved. 3 months into his new role, Daniel found himself standing in front of Morganvale Industries' senior leadership team, presenting a comprehensive analysis of operational inefficiencies across the company's supply chain. His hands were steady despite the nervous energy coursing through his body. The presentation represented weeks of research, late nights poring over logistics data, and countless revisions under Richard's merciless scrutiny. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table, her expression unreadable. Richard was to her right, arms crossed, waiting for Daniel to stumble. The other executives ranged from mildly interested to openly skeptical. They had all heard about the janitor-turned-executive, and most considered him a pet project that would eventually collapse under its own implausibility. Daniel advanced to the first slide, which showed a map of the company's distribution network. Red lines indicated current routing patterns. Green lines showed his proposed optimization. "Our current distribution system operates on a hub-and-spoke model established 12 years ago," Daniel began, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "At that time, it made sense given our customer concentration in the Northeast and Midwest. However, our client base has shifted significantly toward the South and West Coast. We're now spending 37% more on transportation costs than necessary because we're routing shipments through outdated hubs." He clicked to the next slide, showing detailed cost breakdowns. By establishing 2 new distribution centers in Atlanta and Phoenix, and reducing reliance on our Chicago hub, we can cut transportation costs by $4.2 million annually. The initial investment for the new facilities would be $8.6 million, giving us a payback period of just over 2 years. One of the executives, a woman named Jennifer who ran operations, leaned forward. Your analysis assumes we can negotiate favorable lease terms in both markets. Have you actually contacted commercial real estate brokers in those cities, or is this theoretical? Daniel had anticipated the question. Richard had drilled him relentlessly on backing up every assumption with real data. I've spoken with 3 commercial real estate firms in each market. The numbers in my analysis reflect actual quotes for warehouse space that meets our specifications. I've also factored in local labor costs, tax incentives both cities offer for new business development, and projected utility expenses based on comparable facilities. Jennifer looked surprised. Richard's expression didn't change, but Daniel caught a slight nod that might have been approval. The questions continued. Some were genuine attempts to understand his proposal. Others were designed to expose weaknesses, to prove that the janitor was playing in a league beyond his capabilities. Daniel fielded each one, sometimes confidently, sometimes admitting uncertainty while explaining how he would find the answer. After 45 minutes, Victoria called an end to the presentation. Thank you, Daniel. The leadership team will discuss your proposal and provide feedback by end of week. You can go. Daniel gathered his materials and left, his shirt damp with sweat despite the conference room's aggressive air conditioning. He had no idea if the presentation had been successful. Executive poker faces were impossible to read. Back at his desk, a small workspace Richard had arranged in a corner of the finance department, Daniel tried to focus on other projects. But his mind kept replaying moments from the presentation, analyzing his responses, wondering if he had said too much or not enough. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma's school. Mr. Chen, this is Principal Morrison. Emma is in the nurse's office with a fever. Please call to arrange pickup. Daniel's stomach dropped. He checked the time. 2 in the afternoon. He had another meeting at 3, then a conference call at 4 that Richard had specifically told him was mandatory. But Emma was sick. She needed him. He called the school, explained he would be there as soon as possible, then went to find Richard. His supervisor was in his office reviewing financial projections, reading glasses perched on his nose. I need to leave early, Daniel said from the doorway. Emma's sick at school. Richard looked up. How sick? Fever. They want me to pick her up. Is it serious enough to require emergency care? I don't know. Probably not. But she's 9 and she's scared and she needs her father. Richard removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate care. You have critical meetings this afternoon. The conference call at 4 involves West Coast distributors discussing contract renewals worth $15 million annually. Your absence would be noted and interpreted as lack of commitment. Emma is my daughter, Daniel said, keeping his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. She comes first. Always. Does she? Because for the last 3 months, work has come first. Late night studying. Weekend research. Missed dinners and bedtime stories. You've made choice after choice that prioritized this job over being present for your child. Don't pretend otherwise. The words stung because they were true. Daniel had sacrificed time with Emma repeatedly, always telling himself it was temporary, that once he established himself he could restore balance. But Richard was forcing him to acknowledge the reality. In corporate life, there was no balance. There were only trade-offs. I'm going to get my daughter, Daniel said quietly. Fire me if that's a problem. He turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped him. I'm not going to fire you. I'm going to tell you the same thing my own mentor told me 25 years ago when I faced a similar choice. Your daughter will forgive you for missing meetings. The company will not forgive you for being unavailable when they need you. That's the brutal calculus of corporate advancement. Fairness doesn't enter the equation. Daniel looked back at his supervisor. Is that why you don't wear a wedding ring? Because you chose meetings over your family until they got tired of being second priority? Richard's face went pale. For a moment, Daniel thought he had gone too far, that he had finally pushed past professional disagreement into personal insult. But Richard's expression shifted into something that looked almost like respect. "Get your daughter," Richard said. "I'll handle the 4 o'clock call. But understand that every time you make this choice, you're signaling to the organization what matters most to you. Eventually, they'll believe you. And they'll plan accordingly." Daniel didn't respond. He grabbed his coat and left, practically running to the elevator. The bus ride to Emma's school felt eternal. Daniel stared out the window, Richard's words echoing in his mind. The brutal calculus. Choose family and plateau in your career. Choose career and lose your family. There had to be another option. Some middle path where he could be both a good father and a successful professional. But watching the city scroll past, Daniel wondered if that middle path existed only in motivational speeches and aspirational LinkedIn posts. Real life seemed to demand absolutes. All in or all out. No compromises, only sacrifices. Emma was in the nurse's office looking small and miserable, her face flushed with fever. When she saw Daniel, tears started flowing. "I don't feel good, Dad," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart. Let's get you home." The nurse handed him a thermometer reading and a note about symptoms. Probably just a virus. Rest and fluids. Monitor for worsening. All the standard advice that meant nothing serious but felt terrifying when it was your child suffering. They took a taxi home, an extravagance Daniel would have agonized over 3 months ago but barely registered now. Emma dozed against his shoulder, burning hot even through their clothes. Daniel stroked her hair and thought about all the times Sarah had done the same thing, comforting their feverish daughter while Daniel was at work or school or tennis practice. Sarah had carried so much of the parenting burden, and he had let her, assuming there would always be time later to be more present. Then she got sick, and later never came. He had sworn to himself after she died that Emma would always come first. That he would be there for every fever, every fear, every moment she needed him. And yet here he was, 3 months into a corporate job, and Richard was right. Daniel had let work consume his life again. Different job, same pattern. Always choosing tomorrow's security over today's presence. At home, Daniel settled Emma on the couch with blankets and started heating soup. His phone kept buzzing with work messages. Updates on the afternoon meetings he was missing. Questions about his supply chain proposal. A reminder about the Wednesday deadline for his weekly case study analysis. He silenced the phone and focused on Emma. Took her temperature every hour. Made sure she drank water. Read to her from the book they had been slowly working through at bedtime, the rare nights when he made it home early enough. Around 6, Emma fell into a deeper sleep. Daniel moved her to her bed, tucking the worn teddy bear under her arm. Her fever had dropped slightly. Still elevated, but not dangerously so. She would recover. Kids always did. His phone showed 17 missed messages. Daniel scrolled through them with growing anxiety. The supply chain proposal had generated significant discussion. Some executives wanted more analysis. Others had concerns about implementation timelines. Victoria wanted to meet first thing tomorrow to discuss next steps. The Wednesday case study was waiting in his email. A complex scenario involving international tax implications and transfer pricing strategies. Topics he barely understood even after 3 months of intensive study. He would need at least 4 hours to complete the analysis properly. Daniel looked at the clock. 6:30. If he started now, worked until midnight, he might finish. But that meant leaving Emma alone while she was sick. Trusting that she wouldn't wake up scared or uncomfortable or needing her father. He thought about Richard's words. The brutal calculus. Every choice signaling what mattered most. Daniel closed his laptop and went back to Emma's room. He pulled a chair next to her bed and sat down, prepared to spend the night watching over her. The case study would be late. His test score would suffer. Richard would note the failure. But Emma wouldn't wake up alone and frightened, calling for a father who was too busy with spreadsheets to comfort her. Around 10, Daniel dozed off in the chair. He woke to his phone buzzing. Victoria's name on the screen. He stepped into the hallway to answer. "Daniel, we need to talk about your proposal," Victoria said without preamble. "The executive team is split. Half think it's brilliant. Half think you're in over your head and the analysis has fundamental flaws. Which half do you fall into?" Daniel asked. "I think you've identified a real problem and proposed a viable solution. But I also think you underestimated the political complexity of shutting down operations in Chicago and shifting to new markets. The Chicago facility employs 200 people. Closing it means layoffs, union negotiations, potential public relations disasters." Daniel hadn't considered that angle. His analysis had focused purely on financial optimization, treating the Chicago hub as just another data point rather than a workplace employing real people with families and mortgages. "You're learning to think like an executive," Victoria continued. "But you're not quite there yet. Executives don't just analyze numbers. They consider stakeholder impacts, political ramifications, implementation risks. The human element of business decisions." "I should have thought about the employees," Daniel admitted. "Yes. But the fact that you're willing to admit that shows growth. Richard's been giving me weekly updates on your progress. He says you're stubborn, defensive, and occasionally insufferable. But also incredibly determined and surprisingly capable of learning from mistakes." That's high praise coming from Richard. It is, actually. He doesn't suffer mediocrity. The fact that you've lasted 3 months is significant. Most people in your situation would have quit or been dismissed by now. Emma called out from her bedroom, her voice weak and frightened. Daniel excused himself from the call and went to his daughter. She had kicked off her blankets and was crying softly. "My head hurts," she whimpered. Daniel felt her forehead. Still warm but not dangerously so. He gave her children's pain reliever and sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her back until she drifted off again. When he returned to the hallway, Victoria had hung up. She had sent a text instead. "Take care of your daughter. We'll discuss the proposal when you're back in the office." Daniel spent the night alternating between dozing in the chair and checking on Emma. By morning, her fever had broken. She was weak and tired but clearly on the mend. He called Mrs. Patterson to ask if she could watch Emma for the day, promising to come home early to take over. The elderly woman agreed without hesitation, showing up at 8 with homemade chicken soup and a stack of children's books. Daniel thanked her profusely, made sure Emma was settled, and headed to work. He arrived at 9, 2 hours later than usual. His desk was covered in sticky notes from Richard. Questions about missed meetings. Reminders about deadlines. A pointed inquiry about the Wednesday case study. Daniel found Richard in his office and knocked on the open door. "The case study isn't finished," Daniel said before Richard could speak. "Emma was sick. I stayed with her. I'll have it done by tomorrow morning." Richard studied him for a long moment. "That's the 3rd deadline you've missed this month." "I know. The agreement was 3 failed tests and you're done. You've now failed to submit 3 times. By the terms we established, that means your probation is over." Daniel's heart sank. He had known this might happen, had accepted the risk when he chose Emma over the case study. But hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. However, Richard continued, "Those deadlines were missed for reasons I consider justifiable. Your daughter's illness. A legitimate family emergency. Victoria disagrees with me, by the way. She thinks I'm being too lenient, that executives don't get special consideration for personal problems. So I'm fired? No. You're being given an extension. 1 week to complete all 3 case studies to an acceptable standard. But understand this, there won't be another extension. Either you figure out how to balance your responsibilities, Or you accept that this career path isn't compatible with single parenthood. Daniel nodded, unsure whether to feel grateful for the reprieve or insulted by the ultimatum. Your supply chain proposal caused quite a stir, Richard added, changing subjects. Victoria wants you to present a revised version next week that addresses the human resources implications. Talk to HR, work with operations to develop a transition plan for Chicago employees. Make the numbers work without destroying lives. That's not possible, Daniel said. The whole point of the optimization is closing inefficient facilities. Then you need to get creative. Early retirement packages. Relocation assistance. Retraining programs. There are ways to restructure operations that minimize harm while still achieving cost savings. You just have to be willing to think beyond simple financial calculations. Richard pulled out a folder and handed it to Daniel. Case studies from other companies that successfully managed similar transitions. Learn from them. Adapt their approaches to our situation. Show me you can think strategically about the human side of business decisions. Daniel took the folder, adding it to the mountain of work already overwhelming him. The week that followed was the hardest of Daniel's life. Between completing 3 overdue case studies, revising his supply chain proposal, attending regular meetings, and trying to be present for Emma, he averaged 4 hours of sleep per night. He existed in a fog of exhaustion, fueled by coffee and adrenaline and stubborn refusal to fail. Emma went back to school after 2 days, but she was clingy in a way she hadn't been before. She wanted Daniel to sit with her during dinner. To read longer bedtime stories. To just be there, present and attentive, instead of distracted by work concerns. Daniel tried to give her what she needed while also meeting Richard's impossible deadlines. He worked during Emma's school hours. Studied after she went to bed. Woke at 4 a.m. to squeeze in extra hours before getting her ready for school. By Friday, he had completed all 3 case studies and revised his supply chain proposal. The work was adequate rather than excellent, meeting minimum standards rather than exceeding them. But it was done. Richard reviewed everything over the weekend. Monday morning, he called Daniel into his office. Your case studies pass. Barely. The supply chain revision shows improvement but needs more work. Overall assessment, you're surviving, but not thriving. The question is whether survival is enough. It has to be, Daniel said. I don't have anything left to give. That's the problem. This job requires people who can operate at full capacity consistently. Not people who are perpetually exhausted and stretched beyond their limits. You're trying to do 2 full-time jobs, single parent and corporate executive. Eventually, one or both will suffer. Daniel knew Richard was right. He could feel himself breaking under the pressure. Not dramatically, but slowly. Bit by bit. Each missed deadline and distracted conversation with Emma chipping away at his foundation. What do you suggest? Daniel asked. Realistically? You need help. A nanny or au pair who can handle the logistics of Emma's daily care. Someone who can pick her up from school, help with homework, make dinner. Free you to focus on work during business hours, then actually be present for quality time in the evenings. I can't afford that on my salary, Daniel said, though even as he spoke, he realized it wasn't true anymore. His salary could support household help. The old Daniel, the one who scraped by on maintenance wages, couldn't afford it. But the new Daniel could. The realization was unsettling. How quickly he had adjusted to having money. How easily he had started thinking of his new salary as inadequate rather than life-changing. Then you need to decide which matters more, Richard said bluntly. Being the person who does everything for Emma, or being the person who provides everything for Emma. You can't be both. Not at this level of corporate responsibility. The distinction cut deep because it exposed Daniel's unspoken fear that being a good parent meant making daily sacrifices that corporate careers couldn't accommodate. That success in business required compromises he wasn't willing to make. But then he thought about the years of struggle. The unpaid medical bills that still haunted him. The constant anxiety about money. The way Emma had grown up understanding poverty as her normal. Was it really better to be present but broke, or absent but secure? "I'll look into hiring help," Daniel said quietly. That evening, he broached the subject with Emma over dinner. She had made friends with a girl at school whose family employed a nanny, so the concept wasn't completely foreign. But Emma's reaction wasn't what Daniel expected. "You don't want to take care of me anymore?" she asked, her voice small. "Of course I do, sweetheart. But my new job is very demanding. Having someone help with the routine stuff would give us more quality time together. I could actually relax when I'm home instead of always being stressed about work. Will the nanny be nice? We'll find someone wonderful. Someone you like. This isn't about replacing me. It's about giving both of us breathing room." Emma nodded, but Daniel could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Another change in a life that had already demanded too much adaptation from a child too young to understand why stability was so elusive. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel interviewed candidates. The process felt strange, almost wrong. Evaluating strangers based on their ability to care for his daughter. Checking references. Discussing salary and responsibilities. Ultimately, he hired a woman named Lisa, a college student studying early childhood education who needed flexible hours and seemed genuinely warm with Emma. The arrangement worked better than Daniel expected. Lisa picked Emma up from school 3 days per week, helped with homework, started dinner. Daniel came home to a daughter who was fed and calm, free to spend the evening actually connecting instead of rushing through routines. His work performance improved. Without the constant logistical stress of managing Emma's schedule alone, Daniel could focus during business hours. His case study scores rose. His contributions to meetings became more substantive. Richard's criticisms, while still frequent, were less scathing. For months into his probation, Victoria called Daniel to her office for a progress review. He sat across from her desk, nervous despite the improvements he had made. "Richard says you're finally starting to understand corporate thinking," Victoria began. "He still has reservations about whether you'll ultimately succeed, but he admits you've exceeded his initial expectations." "That's something," Daniel said carefully. "It is. But I didn't call you here to discuss Richard's opinion. I want to know what you think. Are you happy in this role? Is this the career you want?" The question caught Daniel off guard. No one had asked if he was happy. The assumption had been that everyone wanted corporate success, that advancement was inherently desirable. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Daniel said. "That's not what I asked. Gratitude and happiness are different things. You've worked incredibly hard. You've sacrificed time with your daughter. You've pushed yourself beyond what most people could endure. But do you actually want this life?" Daniel thought about the question seriously. Did he want to spend his days in meetings discussing profit margins and operational efficiency? Did he want to think strategically about supply chains and competitive positioning? Did he want the pressure, the politics, the constant demand to prove himself worthy of a seat at the executive table? "I want Emma to have opportunities one never had," Daniel said finally. "I want her to grow up secure. To attend good schools. To have choices. This job provides that." "Again, not what I asked. I know why you took this job. I'm asking if you want to keep it." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression softer than Daniel had ever seen it. "I created this position because I believed you had potential. Because I was impressed by your integrity and determination. But I'm not interested in forcing you into a career that makes you miserable just because it pays well. Life is too short for that kind of suffering." "What are you saying?" Daniel asked. "I'm saying that if you want to return to maintenance, I'll arrange it. No judgment. No penalty. Just recognition that this experiment didn't fit your life circumstances. Your daughter needs a present father more than she needs a wealthy one." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. Permission to quit. Permission to acknowledge that corporate success wasn't worth the cost. Permission to choose Emma without feeling like a failure. But he thought about the old life. The exhaustion of working 2 jobs. The constant fear. The limitations. Yes, he had been more present then. But he had also been drowning, barely keeping both their heads above water. Was that really better? I want to see it through, Daniel said. Complete the probation. Prove I can do this. Then decide if it's the career I want long term. But I need to know I didn't quit. That I gave it everything and made a conscious choice rather than just giving up. Victoria smiled. That's the answer I was hoping for. Not because I need you to stay, but because you need to know for yourself. Too many people make career decisions out of fear or desperation. You're choosing from a position of strength. That's rare and valuable. She pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. Your 6-month probation technically ends next week. This is an offer for a permanent position as Director of Strategic Operations. Salary is $120,000 plus bonus structure. You'll have a real team, actual authority, and direct access to executive leadership. If you accept, you become a permanent part of Morganvale Industries' management structure. Daniel stared at the offer letter, unable to quite process what he was seeing. Director. 6 months ago, he had been scrubbing toilets. Now he was being offered a directorship. Why? He asked. I barely survived the probation. My test scores were mediocre. Richard still doesn't think I belong. Because you bring something to this company that can't be taught in business school, Victoria said. You understand what it means to struggle. To make impossible choices. To sacrifice for the people you love. Most executives I work with have never experienced real hardship. They make decisions that affect thousands of lives without understanding the human cost. She gestured at the offer letter. I need people who remember what it's like to worry about rent and medical bills. Who know that business decisions aren't abstract calculations but real impacts on real families. You'll make me a better CEO by challenging assumptions and pushing us to consider consequences others might ignore. Daniel picked up the offer letter, his hands trembling slightly. This was it. The culmination of 6 months that had nearly broken him. The reward for every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of doubt. I need time to think, he said. Of course. Take the weekend. Discuss it with your daughter. This decision affects her as much as you. That evening, Daniel took Emma to the park near their apartment. They sat on the swings, rocking gently while the sun set behind the city skyline. Emma was in a good mood, chattering about a school project and a friend's upcoming birthday party. Daniel said during a pause in her monologue, I need to ask you something important. My boss offered me a big promotion. Better job, more money. But it would mean I'm even busier than I am now. At least for a while. What do you think I should do? Emma kicked her feet, considering the question with that serious expression she wore when thinking hard. Would you be happy? She asked. I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated. Mom used to say that if you're not sure about something, imagine explaining your choice to someone you love. If you can explain it without feeling bad, then it's probably the right choice. Daniel's throat tightened. Sarah had said that. One of her many pieces of wisdom about navigating life's difficult decisions. The fact that Emma remembered it, had internalized it enough to offer it as advice, made Daniel ache with missing his wife. That's smart, Daniel managed. So can you explain why you'd take the promotion without feeling bad? Could he? Daniel thought about it honestly. The money would secure Emma's future. The position would give him influence to make Morganvale Industries better for its employees. The accomplishment would prove to himself that he was capable of more than survival. But it would also mean less time with Emma. More stress. More compromise. More moments missed because work demanded his attention. I think, Daniel said slowly, that I can explain it. But I'd need to make promises about how things would be different. About making sure work doesn't consume everything. About being present even when I'm busy. Like having Lisa help more? Emma asked. Yes. And maybe other changes too. Making sure we have special time together that's just ours. Where work doesn't intrude. Emma nodded. I think Mom would say you should take it. She always said you were meant for something more than you believed. That you just needed to see yourself the way she saw you. The words broke something in Daniel. Tears spilled down his cheeks, and he didn't try to hide them. Emma climbed off her swing and hugged him, this small fierce person who had carried far too much for far too young. I love you, Dad, she whispered. Whatever you decide. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in this world. They stayed at the park until dark, swinging and talking and just being together. When they finally went home, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. A decision made not from fear or desperation, but from hope and possibility. Monday morning, Daniel accepted Victoria's offer. He became Director of Strategic Operations, with all the responsibility and pressure that entailed. But he also set boundaries. Evenings and weekends were sacred time with Emma unless absolute emergencies demanded otherwise. He delegated tasks, built a capable team, and learned to trust others instead of trying to do everything himself. The job was still hard. Corporate life still demanded sacrifices.